Hello and welcome to today's webinar from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. Apologies for the slightly late start on this webinar today. Today with our partner Telent, we're going to be looking at technology leadership and why it's not just the job of the IT department. This is a chat, no presentations, no slides. It's a valuable conversation to leave you inspired to go and have that conversation back at your organisation. We have a Q&A function on our webinar software, so if you look on the right-hand side, the people have been asking about whether the webinar is going ahead, we are here. And if you want to ask questions as we're going along, please do, and we'll get to them as much as we can. You'll also receive CPD accreditation for joining us today, so look out for that by email either straight after this, or if you're watching on catch-up, it'll be with you within the month. Our plan today is to run for 50 minutes in total. So let's get started. I invite my speakers, my panelists onto the stage. Hello, right. So you'll notice that we have two speakers. We were expecting three. So Dave Randall from Telent will join us shortly, we hope. And I'd like to introduce Chris, who is the Chief Constable of Staffordshire Police, and Matt, who is Assistant Chief Coast Guard at His Majesty's Coast Guard. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So we're going to start this webinar today talking about the strategic context, which is what we always do with our webinars. I was interested to read and see what the Home Secretary said about technology when she spoke at a conference recently. There's been a Police Foundation report we'll hopefully see and hear, which would be lovely. And we've also with the Coast Guard with their annual report talking about the step change in the way that they use technology and about transforming experience. So our topic today is about achieving continuous improvement through technology leadership, and what does that mean in practice? So my first question to you, whilst Dave gets settled in there, is to ask you how much technology features in your day-to-day work. So Chris, you join us from Staffordshire Police, you're the Chief Constable. I imagine you're a very busy man. And how does technology affect you in your day-to-day work?
It's pretty fundamental, Catherine, and in fact I'm actually in Harrogate at the minute for what we call Chiefs Council, where all the chiefs in the country get together to discuss the current challenges of the day. And up alongside politics and funding, technology is very much centre stage. So that's the national picture, and then of course that very much translates into the local. So it's the language about something being a golden thread is a bit overused, but I think what I would also say is I think technology and obviously then the information that feeds that is probably one of the most significant challenges in policing today, but also one of the biggest opportunities as well. So day-to-day conversation on a very tactical and operational level, but a significant issue for policing strategically as well.
Excellent. So Matt, IT is a challenge and an opportunity. Does that resonate with you in the Coast Guard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely an opportunity. And for me, it's something that features daily in my role and with my team. I'm really fortunate to have part of my portfolio managing sort of technology within His Majesty's Coast Guard across all the work we do over the UK. And I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but, change and moving forward, it's the only certain thing is change is here, and it's the only constant, and technology is we've got to keep up and evolve with the times, because our stakeholders and customers ultimately expect it from us, and it creates efficiencies to enable our staff more headspace to be able to do the jobs they need to do.
Yes. So when you're doing that and you're making those decisions and you're dealing with change, you're doing that at that kind of senior leadership team level. And for many people watching today, and for myself, they're not part of those teams and those conversations. So I just wonder, how do you deal with commitments to technology when there are so many other priorities on your time and on your budgets? Where does it sit? Is it an enabler that goes through everything? Is it dealt with a separate subject? How does that work when you're sitting around the table with all those other priorities? Matt, how does it look for you?
I think it's fundamental to what we do. With organisations now, and I'm sure Chris will back this up in terms of we need to make data-driven decisions, and technology is an absolute enabler to capture that data, that information, so we in leadership positions can make the right decisions for our organisations as we move forward. So it's absolutely front and centre of everything we do across the service.
But when you're making those big technology decisions about, replacing an entire system which costs, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, how do you how does that sit with all the other priorities of your organisation?
I think it's understanding the value of what that technology is going to be to bring to the to the service.
Yes.
And it's really understanding the problem you're trying to tackle. It's really easy to say technology is the answer to everything, and look at this, it's nice and shiny. But actually, what's the user requirement? What are we trying to solve? What efficiencies are we trying to drive?
Yeah.
How are we going to provide a better service for the casualty, the customer, whichever language you want to put in to it? So it's crucial.
Yes, yes. So you've hit the nail on the head there, isn't it? It's about what problem is it trying to solve. So what does that look like in policing, Chris, right now? What are the big problems that technology is helping you solve when you're sitting with your leaders?
Well, before I sort of move to the positives, I think there's a real challenge within policing that in the past we haven't made timely decisions around technology that we are now paying for today. So, even in the last 12 months, I've had to invest nearly £6 million in right sizing basically legacy systems. So there's a real, I think they call it a tech debt that exists that needs dealt with effectively. So there's a little bit about just in terms of keeping the lights on or having a stable set of core technologies about making sure that you don't, especially in times of, efficiencies and financial challenges, see IT budget as somewhere that you can trim without consequence because it may well not be this chief constable, it might be the next one who all of a sudden thinks, what on earth were you doing in December of 2024? Because you've now cost me X millions of pounds. And even worse than that, it could generate real risks around public safety, around staff and officer safety as well. So I think whenever we're making decisions, there's a little bit about making sure that you think short term and long term, and it's got to be about value as well as pure cost. So it's easy to say, but in the current climate, I'll be very, very loath to reduce technology budgets and staffing. In fact, it's one of the few areas that I'm increasing at the minute because I think it's got a real opportunity to address some of the short-term challenges around productivity and efficiency. But if you don't put the sort of wiring or the foundation down now for the future, it'll become increasingly more expensive and you will fall behind very quickly, whatever industry you're in.
Yes, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because chief constables aren't in post for huge amounts of time, maybe 3-5 years, probably quite a long time for a chief. So how do you make sure that those decisions that you make in December 24 are the right decisions for your successor and for the future? What information do you need to do that and take those decisions so you know that you won't be the person that they said actually in December 24 you didn't make the right decision? So how do you do that?
Well, I think there's something sort of morally and ethically that you're a steward of an office in an organization at any point in time. So you've got to make decisions that, may well actually be relevant in 10, 15, maybe even 20 years' time for an organization. And that's decisions we take all the time around staffing and capital builds, et cetera, et cetera. Technology maybe hasn't been taken as seriously in the past around that. So I think from my perspective, there's an ethical and moral responsibility to think about the future and what you do now, even if there's not an immediate return on investment. And then I think if you surround you with the right people, the right leaders who are digitally capable, who think in that space, you get the right challenge from outside the organization, from experts. If you're scanning the policing family as to who's doing what well, I think you can make strong, sound decisions, but there's always wild cards that crop up in terms of just a fundamental change somewhere. And I suppose AI has been around for a long time under different titles and names, but that's probably something now that is accelerating a lot of choices in policing about where to invest or where not to.
Yes, so the AI word comes up in practically every webinar I do in some way, shape or form, regardless of whether it's about technology or not. You've mentioned lots of things there. I'd like with Matt just to pick up on a couple. One is around this technical debt. So keeping the lights on. How much of your time and budgets is spent? So I looked at your reports. It was £25 million is your technology budget in the Coast Guard. I just wonder how much of that is spent keeping the lights on.
I think it's a constant evolution, and I think that's the key word with technology. And we're really fortunate to have a great team within our IT department that absolutely are doing that strategic road mapping. And trying to reduce that technical debt as much as possible, and ensuring that we've got the best tools to do our job, and our frontline staff have got the tools they need. But the reality is, there's a lot of systems that the organisations run that have been in place for a very long time, and organizations rely on. And the integrations that come with those and sharing information into other platforms is something that takes time to migrate, especially when you're dealing with legacy technology. So we spend a lot of time kind of trying to keep the lights on, but also really looking forward to the future and having an absolute set strategy and a roadmap that we can all navigate along. And I think it links across to Chris's point in terms of, he's in that post, any chief constable's there for, a tenure of a period, and they hold that public office and they're doing the best at the time. But that looking forward, you make decisions today with the information you have. Yes. The challenge, I guess, we've got as senior leaders is technology is evolving so quickly. Who knows what tomorrow is going to bring? So we've got to make the best judgments we can now with the information available to us at the time.
Interesting. So can I just talk to you about the project you did with Telent, the sponsors of this webinar, where you connected up all of your Coast Guard stations? That sounds to me like a very long-term project that somebody way back when thought that was a good idea, and now it's happened. So how does something like that get paid for and thought about so that that is future-proofed when you're looking 10, 15 years in the distance?
Yeah, so I mean, we worked with our partner Telent on that connectivity program, not only to the 11 Coast Guard stations we've got across the UK, but we've got over 160 radio masts around the coastline of the UK, enabling us to talk to shipping in the most remote locations, on the top of a hill, and we were using quite legacy copper technology up to those hilltops. Now we've got fibre. That not only gives us diverse routing, and it gives us the ability to consider what other things we might want to do with that connectivity. So could that be putting additional sensor suites or other tool sets, offering value to the rest of government? The Coast Guard sits within ultimately the Department for Transport, so we're civil servants, and it's about getting best value for money, as it was with any of the emergency services for the taxpayer. We've also done things like in certain parts of the country, because of the work we've done, we've now put fibre or broadband into those areas, because before there was no connectivity. So I think it's about recognising the value of any technology investment, and often it's not obvious, so it was really great to see that through the work we've done to maintain our statutory obligations, we've now put high-speed internet into small and remote rural communities in the Outer Hebrides and all around the coast of the UK.
That's interesting. Was that seen as part of social value in the procurement process?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never thought of it like that, in terms of it being a network thing. You could bring that to people who wouldn't have had it otherwise. Fantastic. Yeah. So you used AI, Chris, so we'll come back to that. In terms of your discussions, Staffordshire Police and with the National Police Chiefs Council, what opportunities does it offer right now in terms of solving a problem that you have in policing? Let's sort of talk, practical things. Where do you have your eye on it for? What's it going to do for you?
Yeah, well, I think there's so many opportunities. One strand is clearly how do you make the workplace more productive and less stressful for staff? Because I think, bad tech, or at least badly implemented tech, is maybe a better way of putting it, for me, is a major well-being issue and agitator for staff. So there's something about getting technology inside the organisation somewhere close to what people experience in their private lives. So a lot of the work we've been doing in Staffordshire has been around much more consistency, more reliability, access around portability in terms of where we want officers and staff to be able to work as well. But clearly policing fundamentally exists for people outside of policing. So whether it be victims or communities or members of the public or indeed partners. So a lot of the innovations or progressions of innovations we've seen recently are about, how do we detect crime more effectively? How do we track down offenders? How do we identify and ultimately locate vulnerable people? How do we gather evidence more effectively? So you've got areas now around facial recognition where clearly there's degrees of contention there, but retrospective facial recognition, as in when something's happened and you're putting images into a system to search for something, is incredibly powerful about, bringing people to justice more quickly. Prospective facial recognition or live facial recognition, a little bit more contentious, but again, now there's much stronger codes and policies, because sometimes the technology gets ahead of even legislation and organizations' ability to deliver it in an ethical and an accountable way. But there's probably not any area of policing at the minute that doesn't see technology as a fundamental opportunity to push on and become even more effective than we are at the minute.
And do you feel a pressure to innovate, that there's this drive that you must make use of the technology because it's there and been talked about?
Yeah, I think there's probably more pressure if you don't. So I think the pressure around innovation is trying to find, and this is a clumsy phrase, it's trying to find the right solution and the right partner first time. Because quite rightly and quite helpfully, there's lots of partners out there, private and voluntary sector, with lots of really good processes and capabilities. But one of the big debates in policing is what's the right balance between doing lots of things locally and therefore being able to experiment, test and trial. And then where do you get the economies of scale from and the opportunity to scale up what works in terms of that maybe sort of more national and top-down approach. So I think the pressure is much more on organisations who don't innovate because you start to go backwards very, very quickly. The challenge has been able to, as Matt said, what's the problem you're trying to solve, get a good fit and a match for that problem, evaluate it, and then continually look to improve that product. But you've also got to have a business brain about you because quite understandably, colleagues in the private sector have got shareholders and bottom lines. So in the past, we were working with, let's call it, a lot of hardware in technology. Now you're in the cloud, you've got licensing costs, it's revenue spend very often as opposed to capital. So there's circles to square, but I'm genuinely interested and excited by the opportunities. It's just there are so many of them. Sometimes it's trying to make sense of what direction to go.
Interesting. So slightly overwhelming by the sounds of it. So Matt, in terms of that relationship, hello, Dave. So in terms of that relationship with suppliers, when in the civil service context, are you able to have conversations with them and talk to them about what the problems are, the kind of technology solutions there might be outside of a sort of formal procurement environment, or does it only happen within that?
So I think it's really important that we understand not only from our services perspective where technology is and what the market has to offer. It's as important that we engage at the appropriate times in the appropriate ways with industry so that they understand the challenges that we as services are facing. And that goes all the way down to, and it's really important that we make sure we're capturing the challenges that frontline staff are having, to deal with day in, day out. I don't have to use the technology day in, day out like our staff do. And Chris will be exactly the same. It's so important that we take the feedback from those staff, we get the collective view, and then we can take that and have a conversation with industry as a whole in various sectors, with that communications or whatever it might be, so then they can be prepared for when services organizations go out to market to procure a service, they're ready and they can meet the demands that we're placing so that we get the best product in the best value for money way possible.
Yeah. So one of our questions here is on that sort of engagement with the front lines. Asks, how do you ensure those in the front line are engaged with the change? So ultimately them who have to work with it. So you've described a bit of it there, Matt. Is that a very formal part? So if can you use the example perhaps of when you did the networking with Telent? How much was staff involved with that? Even if there was the specialists, for example. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so I think the networking piece that we partnered with Telent on is probably quite niche in terms of, for most of for our staff, it's something that's an enabler behind the scenes, and they wouldn't necessarily, see it. But absolutely, communication was key, making sure people know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how it impacts them. And ultimately, it gave them a more reliable, service to our infrastructure, which means they can meet the demands of the public and a casualty, to a greater standard. But I think it's when we're on, technology that, might be used by control room staff as an example. It's running, workshops, user groups, feedback, sessions, having representation so that they can work with specialists. And in my organisation, I've got a team that effectively is Coast Guards that kind of straddles across, operations, but also IT. They're the intelligent customer, so they represent the frontline user, but they've got a foot in the camp with IT, so they can do the translation. And they go out and talk to people, and they hear what they've got to say, And the answer isn't always yes. Sometimes it's no because, but it's about having the conversation and making sure that people have had their opportunity to pass on feedback and allow people to innovate. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of trials and innovation, because I think that's a really important part of not being scared to try things and potentially say it didn't work.
Yes, yes. Let me just check in with Dave. Dave, can you hear and see us yet?
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of it. That's a little bit better. Yeah, I can hear you, and apologies for the network firewalls and such like in the office. Comms checks at home are one thing.
Okay, great. Well, I'm so glad that you're able to join us. So in terms of the conversation we've been having, which is around that relationship between the emergency services, Coast Guard and police, which we have here today, and the supplier, around making sure you have those conversations, work out what the problems are and solutions. Do you do lots of that with Telent clients? Are you doing that all the time? Is it a very kind of common part of your business?
Sorry.
I was just asking how it works in terms of you working with emergency services to help them think through their problems outside of the standard procurement process, that kind of thinking process.
Yeah, I think what we're really good at Telent is that close engagement with our customers and building those sort of long-term relationships and moving away from the transactional kind of relationships that are often in this industry. And we find that by building these longer-term relationships, we get a more intimate knowledge of their problem set. We can help them articulate what their problem sets are, and we can then form a transformation sort of pathway in order to meet their sort of end needs. And it's always about the end user for us. We really try and focus on the end user of whatever we're going to be delivering.
I think we've lost the audio there. Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Dave. We'll see if we can sort out your audio. I'll ask who's helping me in the background to see if we can sort that out. In the meantime, Chris, can we talk about the impact of inspection? So when the driver, sometimes the drive for change isn't necessarily coming from the outside world in terms of everybody needs to do AI, but sometimes the inspectors turn up and say, actually, things aren't quite working right. I know your experience in Staffordshire around the control room has been a driver for change for you in terms of improvement. So I wonder if you could share some of that with us and how inspection helps drive improvement through technology.
Okay, well, the police have an inspection regime. It's dominated by one organisation called His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, but they also inspect fire and rescue because there's a lot of similarities between, well, actually all the blue lights, but police and fire, at least in Staffordshire, have that sort of joint relationship as well. What I would say is that very often where police forces have maybe struggled around performance, which is then maybe seen them move into so-called special measures, which is ultimately decided on by the inspection body. Very often at the core of that somewhere, they've got real day-to-day challenges about reliability in their core systems. Yes. But yet technology isn't explicitly inspected anywhere in the framework. Yes. So very often what you find is the inspection that's taken place will identify a number of critical issues, poor service delivery, significant backlogs, failed opportunities to maybe intervene in investigations. And very often within that, there is a key challenge about a system which either doesn't have the right information in it in the first place, isn't accessible, doesn't join the dots up, et cetera, or isn't reliable for staff to be able to operate with. So in nearly all, I would think, of all the police services recently that have found themselves in special measures or engaged, and thankfully we've now come out of that. Technology is a key factor, a key root cause in some of those challenges. And equally, in terms of stepping out of that level of scrutiny, it's been key for Staffordshire around stabilising our core systems and now being able to start to pivot more towards innovation and exploiting technology around productivity, around, from an RPA point of view, doing tasks, basically transactional tasks, much more quickly to a consistent quality, and looking at areas like AI and the associated technologies around facial recognition and redaction and opportunities for auto transcription of statements and the like as well. So I think technology can be at the core of some of the biggest challenges in policing. But if you want to accelerate and improve quickly, alongside a really engaged workforce that actually cares about what they do, I think the other biggest force multiplier is being able to exploit opportunities in data and technology.
And does some of that come from the skill base of the people that you employ in order to help you get there? I wondered, just asking Matt, so in terms of the skills that your staff have around technology enabling you to move forward and realise the vision to transform digitally, do you have the right people with the right skills, and are you able to invest in those, given that you can't pay them loads? And that's the same for policing as well. So what do you think, Matt?
So I think, I'm really fortunate. We've got great people that work for us. And I think everybody that works in the emergency services has that thread that runs through them, that they're there to do the right thing and serve the public and help people. And I think what's great about, organisations, I take my own, is, I joined as a Coast Guard and had nothing to do with technology. And I found something I was interested in. I was given opportunity, and I've managed to get to a position now where I lead that part of the business, and for me it's about if people are interested in certain areas. So if they're interested in technology, they think they've got a good idea, put your hand up, and a volunteer is far better than someone that's press ganged. So say that you want to do it, take those ideas to leaders, and you're not going to get all of them through, but actually one of them will land, and you'll be spotted, and that progresses, and the organizations can invest in you. And I think what's great is that people can go from very frontline roles, being a Coast Guard, a police officer, a paramedic, a firefighter, whatever it might be, but actually you can have very diverse pathways that can lead you into specialist areas, and you can develop your skills. And it's really important that, whilst we could go out and contract in subject matter experts who are contractors, ultimately I want people who understand what we do, drive forward our technology, representing the front line, representing the staff, and understanding what we do. There's then no commercial gain. It's all about doing it for the right purpose.
Yes. Does that resonate with you, Chris? Is that how it works in policing?
Yes, and I think one of the conversations we were actually having today across policing is, in the past we've been very strong about operational skills that senior police leaders need to have. Then came business skills, and alongside that comes the sort of emotional, political intelligence skill set that you need to operate at an executive level. I think more and more now there's a recognition that police leaders here and now, not even in the future, need to be digitally literate and digitally aware of what is going on. And that is not an optional extra. It's not for the nerds of us in policing. That is a core skill set. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be an effective police leader, because you'll not be able to manage risk effectively, because you don't understand how to use your information in your organisation. So I think the scales are coming off a little bit more, but there's still an element, I think, of why you want a really good generalist awareness and leaders who get technology and what it could do. There will be this balance, I think, of growing your own skill set, people who are going to stay with you because they're invested in the place, the organisation, the culture, and then bringing people in and out of the organisation at the right times, and then the right relationship with the private sector, which can bring things in at a pace that you may well never be able to do in your own organisation. So I think that's part of the challenge in all this, is just what is the right mix of workforce and capabilities for where an organisation is at any given point of time. And some of this comes down to what cash it can invest as well. So that's the challenge. As you said at the start, how do you prioritise this? The risk is, if IT is deprioritised, that what you think is a key priority for you will ultimately suffer quite quickly anyway.
Yes, that's interesting. I'm interested in this idea that the leaders now should be digitally literate. In the process of being recruited to be a chief constable, when you're perhaps an AC or a deputy, when you go through that process, do they test digital literacy? Is that talked about in interviews or in tests or anything? Does it fit in the process?
Well, they started doing some of the assessments on a laptop. So that was a base of test, but not particularly. Because again, I think in some ways, like sort of people management and other specialist areas of policing, it was seen as, well, there'll be someone else in your team will do that for you. But if you're missing a key chunk of knowledge and awareness about what could really improve your organization inside and out, I don't think you can be an effective leader. So whenever I was sort of coming through, mobile phones were relatively unique and sort of brick-like in appearance and weight. So it rapidly improved. And, the people I'm employing now in policing, on the one hand, are relatively inexperienced in terms of some of the challenges they have in the front line of policing, but they are very, very digitally aware and capable. One of their biggest frustrations is we're not giving them stuff that is user friendly, that they put information in once, and that they can, then use it to keep people safe and indeed keep themselves safe. So I think there's a real opportunity now with a much younger workforce. We just need to put the right kit and capability in their hands, because I think they're much more open to that journey around skills and capability.
Yes. So Matt, you were nodding your head violently there.
Yeah,
you're obviously in great agreement there.
Yeah, I was, and I think what's really challenging is in our personal lives. We are all digitally connected 24/7, and challenges we have as organisations is, I can go out and buy the latest whatever it is tomorrow, but as an organisation, we've got to go through procurement processes. We've got to risk assess it. We've got to look at data security. We've got to look at how that all links in. There's no point of just going and buying all these different Gucci bits of kit that don't talk together and actually make a problem. So I really acknowledge what Chris was saying there in terms of we've got great people that work for us, and in their personal lives, and there's technology available, but as services that the public relies on, we've got to make sure that technology, when we bring it in, is robust, it's supportable, it's resilient. And it is a challenge in terms of I have conversations fairly regularly of, why can't we have this? Because I've got one. Well, it's not that simple. And it sounds probably like a cop-out answer, but it really isn't, because if we don't do it right, the ultimate worst case could happen, and none of us want that.
Yes. So Dave, let's check your can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Well, at last, fantastic. Okay, so I hope of our conversation around skills and the need for digital literacy by the leaders, because ultimately somebody very high up signs off the business case, signs off the funding, and agrees that you're going to make this big expenditure on your control room or on your network of Coast Guard stations. So we need those leaders to be digitally literate. What are your thoughts in terms of the conversations you have, Telent, with emergency services? Do you find that there's a good understanding of technology generally, or do you think there's something missing there in terms of how they are able to interact in that way?
I think it depends. I think certain individuals are incredibly technically literate. They're real sort of thought leaders in their area.
Yes.
Others are not so tech savvy, but that sort of doesn't really matter. We can help fill in the gaps for these people. We don't see that as too much of a challenge. It's great if you've got somebody that knows exactly what they want, but sometimes it's also really important to tease out exactly why they want that and what benefit they're expecting to gain from that as well. So it's a good balance, but the end game is understanding the requirements and knowing what benefits they might bring.
Okay, excellent. All right. So we talked a bit about skills and upskilling stuff. I think maybe both of you mentioned about this in and out business of people coming from the public sector, going into the private sector, and then coming back in again. Matt, we talked in the briefing a little bit about this, about the value of that, about being able to have ex-Coast Guard, ex-policing in technology companies, allowing that interaction to improve. Can you give us some examples of that?
I think, in terms of why it adds value is the supplier has people that understand the customer's needs, i.e. you can talk on a level and you're talking to someone who potentially has walked a mile in your shoes. You're not talking from a technology to technology perspective. You can explain the problem, someone gets it. And we all know it's a lot easier when you understand something, you've felt it before, you've been there before, you can get the concept. And so having people that have a background in the services, and it doesn't even need to be, from my example, it doesn't need to be someone who's been in the Coast Guard, but someone who understands emergency response, someone who understands that we need high availability systems and why we need them, can come from anyone in public safety, really. and they can then advocate for that within industry. And it helps industry understand when services are putting out requirements documents asking for availability of, sort of 5 nines, really high levels. Why do they want that? Well, this is why, and this is the effect. If they don't have it, it's going to happen. So there is a bit of an advocacy that goes on, because I think once you're in, the public sector and you perform a role that serves the public, I don't think it ever leaves you, regardless of whether you go into the private sector or not.
Yes, I get that. I used to work for London Fire Brigade, so yes, I understand that public service side of things. So, Chris, in terms of getting good staff to do all the technology transformation that you want to help you improve and provide better service for the public, which is what it's all about,
yes.
Do you struggle to get people in to come and work in policing? I mean, are they just too expensive?
Well, I think you get what you pay for. And I think on occasions, especially whenever you've got a critical piece of work or a period of time where you need to accelerate, in some areas, I think you invest the money if you want the return. So as long as you can justify that, it's about value, not purely cost, but you need to be prudent and it needs to be defensible. But I do think working for the public sector has got a huge amount going for it, in terms of what we do every single day, whether it be Coast Guard, fire, police, ambulance. People join as a vocation, but very often join within their local area where they can contribute and give something back. But equally, there's lots of people now, I suspect, joining policing as cops who may well not do their 30 or 35 years. They may well come into policing, get some really key skills, hopefully, and give us a good chunk of their life and their time, but then may well move into other sectors, whether it be voluntary or private. So I think it's healthy not only to grow your own, and I've been very clear that when it comes to uplifting numbers in policing, it's got to be about skilled staff as well as just police officers. But we've had some brilliant partnerships with people in the private sector who've come in for a discrete piece of work. And even whenever they leave, you still maintain those appropriate relationships and engagements. And very often the networks now that exist within policing around the digital and the business community are incredibly valuable just to stay plugged into, to go to the right conferences, to go to the right events, to build your network, to have an understanding of what's going on in other police services, and sending your staff around the country to observe and soak up good advice. And because I don't really know anymore how to do policing. Shock horror, because I'm a senior leader in policing. My job is to facilitate the people who do policing every single day. And there's something about actually they understand the problems a lot better. And whenever you're planning to drop in a new bit of tech or a new process, I think you're very foolish if you don't give it to police officers to break or to test or to try. Because very often they'll be able to enhance it or improve it or inform a much stronger business ask of someone coming in the first place. So, as I say, I think we're in a really good position now. We've got a workforce that is up for that, is very engaged, is more questioning. I'm just not sure we give them the problems early enough and involve them in the solutions in the way that we could.
Interesting. Do you have any comment on that, Dave, in terms of give technology to people so that they break it so you can work out whether it's actually doing the job it should be doing?
So as I mentioned to you previously, I'm an ex-military guy. So for 25 years, I was cutting around in a uniform as well. So absolutely, we were breaking everything. We absolutely. It's no test is better than giving it to the boots on the ground to see if it actually works. So engaging with those people early and actually listening to them and getting their ideas as well, because there's some really bright people who can come up with some fantastic things that you may have not. The further up the chain you get, you lose a bit of touch, Chris's point. So listening to those people and hearing what their problem set is really important.
Excellent. Okay, so we have a question here, which is specifically for Chris, but I think it's a general question, which is around this idea of when you make change and you have a post-implementation review, how you learn the lessons of what you've been through, whether that's because the reason for it was inspection or because you've done a major project, want to make sure it all worked, and how you take those lessons and make sure that in the future you don't make those mistakes again, or you do good things again. How does that work, perhaps in Coast Guard? So when you did your big project with Telent, how did you reflect on the lessons from doing such a major technology rollout so that in the future you were able to improve it?
I think I think it's that continuous conversation throughout the program and having a really honest conversation at the end, both internally and externally with partners, and not being afraid to say we didn't get it right. Because that's what the wise person does, is learns from the past. We're never going to get everything right, and when you do significant and strategic change programs, things are going to come up that you never thought you'd recognize, never thought you'd know. It's how you adapt to that. So sharing that for as Chris talked about earlier, handing the reins onto a chief constable 10 years down the line, that's all good, valuable stuff. So sharing those lessons, none of us are perfect, and we're all going to make mistakes. It's how to deal with them is what makes us the people we are.
Absolutely. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I've just been able to keep a little bit of an eye on the sort of question bar to the side. I think the lessons that we've learned in Staffordshire is, I think, first of all, whenever you bring in, especially a big technology drop, you've got to be very confident you're bringing in for the right reasons, and that you slow it down more than perhaps you think you need to. If you're bringing something in too quickly to either drive out savings immediately or remove people from certain roles and put them into other ones, you've got to allow a period of time for that technology to soak in, for staff to get used to it, become aware of it, that the training is just in time and effective. You do your floor walking, you expect your snags, and then you can take the benefits from it as well. But if you haven't identified what your problem is in the first place and got some really careful KPIs and benefits realization scripts in the background, the risk is you spend a lot of money on something and you don't actually ever realize the benefits for it. So there's a sweet spot there about, if you're investing in technology to make a difference, it needs to make the difference. But listen very carefully to your staff whenever something first drops, because sometimes there's an over optimism about what things will deliver in day one. So I think there's a few lessons been learned in Staffordshire, as well as some very good examples of when technology has made a very positive difference. The key for me is, Dave talked about it, Matt did as well, involve the front line from the start, have a really good user group, let them have a play with it, don't make assumptions, and come back and check that it's actually delivering what it was meant to deliver, and it hasn't opened up a problem somewhere else in the organisation as well.
Yeah, some kind of perverse consequence perhaps elsewhere. Okay, that's useful advice. A lot of the language of reports that I read a lot of reports coming out of all parts of the emergency services, talks about digital transformation. And if you're looking for continuous improvement, thinking about the title of this webinar, how will you know that your organisations are digitally transformed? Is it an end state, or does it just keep going? So, Dave, what does digital transformation look like from your perspective? How do you know you've done it?
I think they're always ongoing. They're potentially never ending. I think individual work streams end. Going back to one point previously, you really need to understand where you're starting from as well. So and measure your performance then, and then after the change has taken place, so if you've realised the benefit that you're anticipating. But in terms of digital transformation, we talk about evolution, not revolution. We talk about a sort of transformation highway, a technical highway that you're on, and a journey, and there will always be new technology. And so it's very, very difficult to sort of draw a line in the sand and say there's the end point, because there will always be the what next, I think. And it's important to keep looking forward as well.
Yes, but I suspect in the public sector, a lot of it's about value for money, because nobody wants something like the Public Accounts Committee, if you were a government department, coming in and kind of scrutinising, going, actually, did you get value for money? Was that your digital transformation? Did it get you value for money? How does the money fit into it? So, Matt, what's that for you? Because you're a civil servant, presumably you have people looking at you and scrutinising what you've spent.
Yeah, I think we all do, don't we? Any service has people, however they're funded, looking at them, because it's obviously taxpayers' money. I think it's having clarity around the purpose, and I think Dave and Chris have referenced it, but it is about what you're setting out to do, and very early identifying the benefits you're going to gain. And probably the biggest challenge that I think is faced in any technology project is scope creep or mission creep, and it's making sure that we box it off and we're really clear where we're driving for. We get to a checkpoint, we get to the end of that sprint, whatever it is in terms of how we're delivering technology. We pause, we review, we make sure we've met the benefits, and then we drive forward. So it's definitely just ensuring that we do make sure we've met what we set out to achieve on that journey.
Okay, so transformation, Chris, is it an end point or is it an evolution?
I think it's, generally speaking, probably in quite risk-averse organisations like policing, probably going to be incremental. There will be opportunities maybe for a step change at some point. So I think it's constantly tweaking, adjusting, and improving what you do with maybe a small number of step changes. I think in terms of what it looks and feels like, I think there's something about, there's key metrics there you can be measuring to see if your service is fundamentally improved or transformed. But a lot of it is, what are your staff saying about, technology and digital capabilities? And then what are the public saying about them? Is it easier, faster, more reliable? Do they trust you more? So I think the metrics are good, but I think the qualitative feedback you get from your own people and your communities probably is the best indicator of whether or not your service now is fundamentally better than it was before.
Fantastic. Now, we are coming to the end of our conversation because we have come to 2:50. So the last thing I'm going to ask you today is to tell us one piece of advice that you'd like to give our viewers about what is the thing they need to go back to the organisation. We've talked about lots of different things here, but what is the one thing you think would be a really positive start to a conversation back at the ranch, as it were? So let's start with you, Dave. What would you like people to go and talk about now, based on all of this?
I think which is probably going to sound odd from a sort of technology company, is to not be seduced by the technology. Really focus in on what it is that you want to benefit. What is the value you are trying to add by going through some change? And if you can identify that really clearly, really early on, then it makes the whole transformation journey a lot easier, and you are more likely to realise the benefits that you're wanting to do.
Excellent. So don't be seduced. Chris, what's your piece of advice?
I think it's probably pretty context specific for the public sector. There is going to be financial pain coming forwards. Do not see your tech budgets and your tech workforce as the place to go to save money. If anything, you should probably be looking at maybe investing more carefully, or at the very least, prioritizing within that. Don't lose ground now that may well take you 10 years to regain it. It's a fundamental force multiplier, even whenever money is tight.
Excellent, thank you. And Matt, finally from you, piece of advice for us.
I think for me, follows on from what Chris said, and it's about having a strategy and a roadmap, and make sure that you weave it all together. Don't do it in isolation. So have a 5-year plan, and think about how all these elements are going to connect together to ultimately give everybody the best product and service it can.
Great, thank you. 3 very good pieces of advice. So don't be seduced by the technology companies or AI. I'm going to add into that. Don't cut the budgets when money starts to be tight. Don't think about technology as an easy place to cut money. And the third one being about a roadmap and thinking about having a sort of collaborative way forward, thinking of having that vision for the future. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, it just brings me to say thank you so much for the 3 of you for joining me this afternoon. We've had a very interesting discussion. I'm sorry, Dave, you've come in and out, but we got you in the end. So thank you very much for persevering, and to Lana for helping you with that. I'm going to just finish off the webinar now, so you will disappear off my screen. Great. So that just leaves me to thank my speakers, as I have. Thank you for watching us this afternoon, and to thank our sponsor, Telent, for this webinar today. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all your questions. Some of them are a bit complicated, so I went with the simpler ones, but hopefully it added some value for you as well. The webinar will be available to watch on Catch Up straight after, and via our website. So if you want to watch it all over again, you can, or ask your friends to watch it too. We will send out CPD accreditation as soon as we can. And you should receive that later if you're watching on Catch Up. Our next and final webinar for 2024, we have done lots. It's been a very busy year. It's on the 12th of December, and it's all about the Luton car park fire. So if you're really interested to find out from the people who were there at the Luton airport when they shut the airport for a day, we will be talking about that next week. So do sign up for that one. And then visit our website, emergencyservicestimes.com, and sign up for our weekly digest to stay up to date. And just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching.